Hello and welcome to the virtual class at the Oxford School of Education, BHAGTA BHAI ka. Today we're going to read the rest of the paragraphs of the chapter The Happy Prince. But before we read the chapter, I would like you to watch this video that's about how to keep yourself safe.
Wet your hands with water. Apply soap, rub your hands palm to palm, and wash the backs of both hands and in between your fingers. Then palm to palm with fingers interlocked. Clasp your hands together and rub. And then clean around the thumbs too. Rub your fingertips in the palms of your hands and finish off with the wrists. Rinse your hands really well with water and dry them thoroughly with a paper towel. Use the towel to turn off the tap. Your hands are now clean.
Thank you for watching the video. Let's begin with this chapter. Earlier we had already read and understood the first part of the video of this chapter, The Happy Prince. Today we're going to read it from the page number 31, the last paragraph. So I'll just start reading the paragraphs and I'll take you further. "I will wait with you one night longer," said the swallow, who really had a good heart. He asked if he should take another ruby to the young playwright. So if you remember that the bird swallow, he followed the instruction given by the Happy Prince and he delivered the ruby to the woman who was in need. And now the Happy Prince described another scene which he could see. There was a young man who was a playwright and he was in middle of writing a play for the director of the theater, and he got faint because it was too cold out there and he didn't have firewood. So the Happy Prince requested the bird again to be his messenger, and now the bird agreed and he said he would stay one more night. He asked if he should take another ruby to the young playwright. "Alas, I have no ruby now," said the prince. "My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires." So if you remember, I told you earlier that the eyes of the Happy Prince were precious sapphires, it's a precious gemstones. And because he had already given the ruby to the woman, now he had those sapphires left in his eyes. And so the Happy Prince told the bird he had these sapphires, rare sapphires, which were brought from India 1,000 years ago. He ordered Swallow to pluck out one of them and take it to the playwright. He will sell it to the jeweler and buy firewood and finish his play, he said. So he told the bird to take out the one of the sapphires and give it to the playwright, expecting that he would sell it to the jeweler and buy some firewood for himself and finish his work. "Dear prince," said the swallow, "I cannot do that." And he began to weep. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, do as I command you. So, when the happy prince said to the bird to take out the sapphires, one of the sapphires from his eyes, so he started crying, the bird, because he didn't want to do that. So, on that, the happy prince said, like he did earlier, so he said it was his order. So the swallow plucked out the prince's eyes and flew away to the young man's garret. It was easy enough to get in, as there was a hole in the roof. Through this he darted. Garret, I told you already, is like a small room. It's basically called attic. And I'll show you the picture. So he took one of the sapphires from the prince's eyes and flew to the young man's garret. And he didn't face much difficulty because there was a hole in the roof, and through that hole he darted. Darted means moved rapidly. That means he just flew through that hole and came into the room. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings. And when he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. So, when the bird reached there, the young man, who was the playwright, he had buried his head in his hand. That means because he was feeling too cold, so he had just covered his face in his hands, and so he couldn't hear the fluttering, the flapping, the sound of the bird's wings. And so when he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. Withered violets, I explained earlier that withered means dried, and violets are the flowers. So he dropped there, the bird dropped the sapphire there, and when the young man, the playwright, looked up, he found that. I'm beginning to be appreciated, he cried. This is from some great admirer. Now I can finish my play. And he looked quite happy. So after finding that sapphire, he thought that this was given by one of his admirers who appreciated his work. So now he thought that he would finish his work quickly, and he looked very happy. The next day, the swallow flew down to the harbor. He sat on the mast of a large vessel and watches the sailors working. So next day, after this work, the bird, the swallow, he flew down to the harbor where the boats and ships are like docked, so just like parked. So he sat on the mast. I explained to you earlier. If not, then look at this picture. This is basically a pole tied with ropes in a boat or vessels or ships. So he sat there and he started watching the sailors who were working there. I'm going to Egypt, cried the swallow, but nobody minded, and when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. So he was sitting there and he loudly said that he was going to Egypt, but nobody heard his voice. And when the night started begin, then he flew back to the happy prince again. I have come to bid you goodbye, he cried. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, will you not stay with me one night longer? So when he flew back to the happy prince, he uh, tried to say goodbye. And on that, the happy prince said to the bird again, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, would you not stay with me one night longer?" "It is winter," answered the swallow, "and the snow will soon be here. In Egypt, the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them." So, when the happy prince asked the bird, he tried to explain the happy prince that here in that place, in that city, uh, the snow would come soon because it was very cold in that country. It became quite cold, and in Egypt is different. It would be warm out there, and he described that the sun is warm. The sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. "In the square below," said the happy prince, "there stands a little match girl. She has she has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not uh, bring home some money." So, without waiting for an answer from the bird, the happy prince started telling him again that he could see in the square there was a little match girl. Match girl, a girl who sells matches. So she had dropped her matches in the gutter, and they all were spoiled. And the happy prince told the bird that if she didn't take any money home, then her father would beat her. And she was crying. "She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare." So the happy prince could also see that the girl was not wearing any shoes and stockings, and her little head was also bare, means she was not wearing any cap or anything. "Pluck out my other eye and give it to her, and her father will not beat her." So the happy prince asked the bird again to take out the other eye, the other sapphire, the precious gemstone from the other eye, and give it to that girl so that her father would not beat her. "I will stay with you one night longer," said the swallow, "but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be quite blind then." So, because the happy prince had already requested the bird to stay one more night, so he agreed. The bird agreed, but he said that he would not be able to do that, what he has asked for, because the happy prince would become blind if he took out the other eye as well. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." So same thing happened again. The happy prince said that it was his order. So he plucked out the prince's other eye and darted down with it. He swooped past the match girl and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. So the happy prince, the bird, took the other eye and he darted down again with it, and he just flew around the match girl and dropped the jewel, dropped that sapphire into her hand. "What a lovely bit of glass!" cried the little girl, and she ran home laughing. So obviously that little girl would not know that it was a precious gemstone, But what she found that it was quite lovely bit of glass, and she took it and ran towards her home. She was happy. Then the swallow came back to the prince. "You are blind now," he said, "so I will stay with you always." So now, when he came back to the prince, he said to the prince that because he had uh, become blind, so he would like to stay forever. "No, little swallow," said the poor prince, "you must go away to Egypt." So these are the conversation between two of them. So the happy prince asked him to go to Egypt. "No, I will stay with you always," said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. So the swallow, he said that no, he would stay with him, and he slept again at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands. So next day, all day, he was just sitting on the prince's shoulder, the statue of the happy prince, and he told him stories, whatever he had seen in past in these strange lands. "Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvelous things, but more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there." So when the little bird told him stories of the strange land, so on that the prince said to the bird that he said that nothing could be more marvelous than anything in suffering of men and women, and there was no mystery so great as misery. So he requested the bird to fly over the city and to find out what was happening there. So the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at the gates. He flew into dark lanes and saw the white faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. So when the happy prince asked him to go and see what was happening there in the city, and so on that request, he flew over the city. And what he found that the rich people were very happy in their beautiful houses. Merry means happy. And at the other side, the beggars were sitting at the gates. So obviously the rich people were enjoying, the poor people, the beggars, they were sitting at their gates and they didn't have anything. He flew into dark lanes and saw the white faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. So he also flew into dark lanes like streets. So he went there as well, and he saw small children. They were starving. They didn't have food to eat, and he could see their white faces. And the children were looking out listlessly at the black streets. Under the archway of a bridge, two little boys were lying in each other's arms to try and keep themselves warm. How hungry we are. So he also saw the two little boys under the archway of a bridge, and because it was very cold, so they were trying to warm each other, by holding each other, and they were also very hungry. So at the same time, "You must not lie here," shouted the watchman, and they wandered out into the rain. So at the same time, there was a watchman, like police. So he asked them to move from there, and he told them not to stay there. So they had to leave. They had to just wander out into the rain. So that means it was raining out there. Then he flew back and told the prince what he had seen. So after seeing all these things, he flew back to the happy prince, and he told him whatever he had seen there. "I'm covered with fine gold," said the prince. "You must take it off leaf by leaf and give it to the poor. The living always think that gold can make them happy." So now the only thing the happy prince had, the gold. So he asked the bird that he must take off the gold leaf by leaf and give it to the poor people. They always think that the gold can make them happy. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow picked off, till the happy prince looked quite dull and grey. So obviously, because he would have ordered again the bird, so he picked off the gold leaf after leaf until he looked quite dull and grey. It's quite ugly. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold he brought to the poor, and the children's faces grew rosier. Grew rosier, so they became happy. So he took all the gold and gave it to the poor people, and the children's faces became quite happy. And they laughed and played in the street. "We have bread now," they cried. So all the children obviously became quite happy, and they were playing, and they were saying that now they would have bread to eat. Then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet capes and skated on the ice. So, as it was already expected, the snow came. So, in that city, it started snowing. And obviously, when snow was there, then it got frozen, like frost also came. So it was very, very cold. Everything seemed like freezing. The streets looked as if they were made of silver. So all over the snow was there on the streets and everywhere, and it was looking quite white like silver. And everybody went about in furs like feathers. So everybody was wearing furry cloths, like woolen cloths with furs. And the little boys wore scarlet caps. Scarlet is a beautiful color, red color like berries. So they were wearing scarlet caps and skating on the ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. He picked up crumbs outside the baker's door when the baker was not looking, and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. So the swallow started feeling very, very cold, but he didn't want to leave the prince now because he loved him too much. He tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings, and also he picked up some crumbs. Crumbs are like the tiny small pieces of bread. So he picked up those crumbs outside the baker store, baker who bakes bread. But at last he knew that he was going to die. He had just enough strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. So now he realized that he had feeling that he was going to die soon. So he tried his best to reach the prince's shoulder one more time. And what he said, "Goodbye, dear prince," he murmured. "Will you let me kiss your hand?" So he couldn't even speak properly. He murmured. He said in very low tone, "Goodbye, dear prince, and will you let me kiss your hand?" "I'm glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow," said the prince. "You have stayed too long here, but you must kiss me on the lips, for I love you." So the happy prince thought that he was now finally going to the Egypt to see his friends. But he asked him to kiss his lips because he also loved him too much. "It is not to Egypt that I'm going," said the swallow. "I'm going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not?" So now the bird told the happy prince that he was not going to Egypt, and where he was going to die. He was going to the house of death. And he also said that the death was the brother of sleep. And he kissed the happy prince on the lips and fell down dead at his feet. So how pity that he was going to Egypt, but he arrived in that city, and this is what happened. So he kissed the happy prince on his lips and got dead. He fell down at his feet. At that moment, a curious crack sounded inside the statue as if something had broken. Curious crack, curious here it means strange. So at that moment, a strange sound came from the statue, and it sounded like something had broken inside. The fact is that the leaden heart had snapped right into two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. So what was that sound? The fact was that because the happy prince had a heart made of lead, so that was broken. Snapped means broken into two parts. So now you could imagine whether it was due to the hard frost, due to the very cold weather, or it was because the bird died. Early the next morning, the mayor was walking in the square below in company with the town councillors. Town councillors, the officials who work with the mayor. So next morning, early morning, the mayor of that city was just walking in the square and with his town councillors. As they passed the column, he looked up at the statue. "Dear me, how shabby the happy prince looks," he said. So when he was passing through that statue, he looked up at the statue and he said that how shabby it was. How shabby the happy prince looked. Shabby is like torn, like dirty. "How shabby indeed," cried the town councillors, who always agreed with the mayor, and they went up to look at it. So these town councillors, they always agreed with the mayor, whatever he said, they always agreed, oh yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, like that. So they also repeated the same thing. How shabby indeed. And then they went there to look at it. The ruby has fallen out of his sword, his eyes are gone, and he is golden no longer, said the mayor. In fact, he is little better than a beggar. So what they found, that obviously the ruby was not there in his sword, and the two sapphires, the precious gemstones, they were also missing, they were also gone, and he was not looking golden anymore. So the mayor said that he was looking like little better than a beggar. So just like beggar, not beggar, but just like beggar. Little better than a beggar, said the town councillors. So as usual, the town councillors, they repeated the same. And here is actually a dead bird at his feet. Continued the mayor, we must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here. And the town clerk made a note of the suggestion. Okay, so proclamation means is like a public announcement. So what the mayor found, that there was also a dead bird. Was that bird the swallow? So he said that we must issue a public announcement, a public notice, that the birds should not be allowed there to die. And the town clerk made a note of the suggestion. So it was kind of like, so they were going to issue a public notice that there shouldn't be any bird coming to that place and die. So they pulled down the statue of the happy prince. As he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer useful, said the art professor at the university. Then they melted the statue in a furnace. Furnace is here, it's like we call in Hindi bhatti, where the fire is at very high temperature, and basically you could see this furnace in factories where they have to melt metals or things or glasses. Okay, so the art professor at the university said that the happy prince statue was not beautiful anymore because he looked shabby. His eyes were gone, his ruby was not there in his sword, and the gold were taken out from his body. So he was not looking beautiful any longer. And they melted the statue because it was, if you remember in the first video, in the beginning, I told that it was made of metal and decorated with gold. So they had to melt it in the furnace. What a strange thing, said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry. Foundry is like workshop. Obviously in workshop or factory where it could be a furnace. So the people were melting the statue in the furnace, and the overseer, the supervisors, they looked at the statue and they said, this broken lid heart will not melt in the furnace. So what they found out, obviously they could melt the rest of the body but not the heart, because it was not made of metal, it was made of lead. So they said that it won't melt in the furnace, and we must throw it away. So they threw it on a dust heap where the dead swallow was also lying. So they melted the rest of the body, the statue, but they couldn't melt the heart because it was made of lead. I told you in the previous video what was lead. Lead was like soft, not like metal, but you must have seen that in battery, the black thing. So it becomes quite hard, but it also gets melted very quickly. So they thought that it wouldn't melt in the furnace, so they took it off and threw it on a dust heap where the dead swallow was also lying. So that dead swallow, the body of that bird swallow, was also thrown at the same place. "Bring me the two most precious things in the city," said God to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the laden heart and the dead bird. So in the heaven above, God asked one of his angels to bring two precious things from the city. So what the angel did, he brought him the heart, which was obviously the happy prince heart, and the dead body of that bird. "You have rightly chosen," said God, "for in my garden of the paradise this little bird shall sing forever more, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me." So this is the end of the story, students. I hope you understood well, but still, if there is anything left which you would like to clarify, you can always contact me on my WhatsApp number. You can also take photo of the paragraph or page, a difficult word, and send it to me. I will definitely get back to you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day ahead. Bye bye for now.